It is a joy to be here. I've been looking forward to this. And even today, I get excited when I present, which I think is wonderful, right? God has me in the right place because this is important work. People need freedom. I love Freedom Ministries. I love the work that you're all involved in. And so it really is a joy to be here. I have my slides off to the side, so I will just let you look at my face, but there are a couple times I might pull the slides up, just maybe to kind of help explain a process that I would like to talk about. I do get going, and I may not see if you're asking a question in the chat. So, Pastor John, you can help me monitor that, or honestly, I don't care if you just unmute yourself and yell and just say, hey, wait a minute. That is totally fine as well. Okay, so as I was thinking about the work that you are all doing, that we have been called to do, it's so important work. It's such important work, and there's a piece of it that involves us caring for ourselves. So we are going to talk a bit about caring well for ourselves before we sign off, because we want to stay in our ministries. We want to keep helping people. I had a dear friend who used to say, like, I know people who say I'd rather burn out than rust out. He was over 90 and still actively involved in ministry. And he said, absolutely not. I never want to burn out. And I have no intention of rusting out. Like, I'm going to serve the Lord as long as I possibly can. And that involves us caring for ourselves well. So we'll talk about that a bit. So we have about 90 minutes, about 80 minutes together now. And in our time together, I really have three goals for us, which is lofty goal. It's kind of lofty. Every time I put a slide deck together for a presentation, again, I love this material. So we call it a fat packer in our house. That's like the person that always brings twice as many stuff on vacation, even though you're only gone for 3 days. I'm a fat packer when it comes to putting a presentation together because it's so much good material. I don't want to leave any of it out. So we're going to do our very best. I'm watching my clock diligently, but we're going to talk about, in broad strokes, how to understand the impact of trauma, how to recognize emotions and behaviors that are coming out of traumatic stress, and how to respond in healing ways. And in advance, I know you're an awesome group. I know you may know some of this stuff. You might already cover some of it, but I'll just go forward as though hearing it another time is going to be beneficial for you. So we will jump in. The good news is that we're called to be supporters. We're not the savior, and Jesus is the savior. So we are going to use our compassion, but we're going to use it in a way that is as competent as possible. We use the phrase a lot in Trauma Free World that it's awesome to be compassionate, but it's even better to be competently compassionate and learn some skills, learn some tools to help us in the work that we're doing. So today, we're hopeful that we can amplify compassion and just start to put some competence on top of it. All right. So our first little session is going to focus in on understand. Let's talk about understanding the impact of trauma. I have a lot of conversations with folks from various churches about the word trauma. I think there's a concern that that perhaps I'm trying to say that God doesn't use suffering, and that as a church we aren't called to participate in the sufferings of Christ. And I don't mean to say that at all. And we know absolutely. You see it every day, and so do I. God uses all things to his glory. Absolutely. But we don't want to downplay what has happened to us, because what has happened is we've kind of grown up kind of a robotic group that says, like, all things work for the good, and they're ignoring their past, and they're feeling bad because I'm praying hard but I don't feel better, right? They're doing the Christian things and they're not moving forward. This is where we want to merge the two. We want to merge our faith with some great practices that we know can help build healing. So to talk about trauma is not to say that God doesn't use all things. Absolutely, he does. But I think that when we help folks heal from their past, we do a better job of bringing them to spiritual maturity, where someday they are able to say, you know what, because of what I've gone through, I can now minister to others. And so because of that, I thank God. It's a spiritual mystery when someone is able to thank God for the difficult things they've gone through, because it gives them a testimony and it lets them help others. But I think we have to help them get to that place of spiritual maturity. So let's talk about trauma and what it is. Before, though, I talk about trauma, I want to talk about stress, because these two things are so linked, especially for those of you who are working with various folks who are really trying to heal and have freedom from addictive behaviors. Stress, it's not inherently bad. Our stress response was given to us as a gift from God, really, as a survival mechanism. We see a threat, our body goes into stress, and our heart pumps faster, shoots blood out to our muscles, our thinking narrows, our breathing increases because we need oxygen and we need our muscles getting ready to go, because our body thinks, I've got to fight a threat, I've got to run away from a threat. And so our body is getting ready. Ultimately, that's really what our stress response is about. So at its core, we have positive stress. When we have stress because we need to run, because we need to fight, that is considered actually appropriate and positive stress. Now, many of us, we're not running or we're not fighting. I think I even said this when I was at Lakewood last time. I can't ever not think of, when I think of our body's stress response system, I always think of the Flintstones. If any of you were kids in the 80s, I think there's 70s and 80s, I think of the Flintstones, and I'm like, Fred's coming out of his cave or his little hut, and like there's a saber-toothed tiger there. His stress response kicks in so he can fight or he can run. Knowing Fred, right, he's probably running. He runs back inside of his house. When the threat is gone, his body calms down. This is what we need to happen in order for our stress response to stay appropriate and positive. Again, many of us, there's no saber-toothed tiger, but we have stress before a big test. I had stress before my daughter took her driving test. We have stress before a big game. We have stressful moments. Our body prepares, we achieve, and then we go back to a state of calm. The problem happens when we don't return to a state of calm. The problem happens when every day we walk out of the house and there's the saber-toothed tiger. Many live with this today. I mean, violence is off the charts today. I actually read recently that globally, 1 in 4 people alive today lives in an area impacted by intense violence or war conflict. That's a quarter of the population, including hundreds and millions of children, which is a number unprecedented since World War II. Right? So toxic stress is a huge issue for many of the world. They're walking outside and the saber-toothed tiger is there. But this is also racism. This is discrimination. This is community violence. This, for some of those that we're serving, this isn't just the saber-toothed tiger is out of the house. We're serving those who grew up and the tiger was actually in the house. The tiger was someone who should have been caring for them, but instead that threat was in their house. And when you live with constant threat, whether it's an abusive parent or an addicted parent or community violence or constant discrimination and racism or war conflict, your body never returns to a state of calm. And cortisol, which is the primary stress chemical, stays high. Cortisol is actually toxic. It's poisonous to our bodies. It's meant to get our heart pumping and our blood flowing for a minute. But imagine if your heart's pumping and your blood's flowing, and if you're in fight, flight, or freeze for weeks, for months, for years. This is where toxic stress now has become clearly trauma. Trauma, by definition, is any event or series of events that has overwhelmed our capacity to cope. And when we say cope, right, we don't mean like, I can't cope with my day. I've got to go get chicken wings, or that's my coping strategy. Like, oh my gosh, I can't even cope with this guy. No, coping means dealing with a situation successfully. So coping would not involve, I can't regulate my emotions. I need to go get high. I can't regulate my emotions. I need to get a drink, right? That's not successful coping. So a trauma is any event or series of events that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope. And that is absolutely living with or waiting on that tiger who is there every day of your life, right? So that is what we talk about when we're talking about trauma. It's not traumatic when the grocery store is out of my favorite brand of coffee creamer. We use the word too frequently, but it is traumatic when I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I don't know if the people coming into my house are going to harm me or not. I don't know if my loved ones will be there for me. Those things are traumatic. And for a long time, those things, they're challenging. It's dysfunction. It's difficult. Well, we need to understand the verbiage around trauma to realize that it's more common than we think. It's been said that in the world, at around 70%, at least 70% of adults have experienced at least one traumatic incident, but many, much more. It's much more of a rule than an exception. And it's not that we want to be victims. We're not trying to make excuses for behavior. We're actually trying to find new pathways to healing. In order to heal forward, you have to go backwards. It's just the way that it works. Okay, so let's talk about types of trauma. There's acute trauma. An acute trauma is like a car accident, maybe an isolated house fire, some kind of a physical accident. It's a one-time event. Most people recover from an acute trauma easily because we've got people, we talk it out, where we have support around us. Typically for around 30 to 60 days, your world's kind of turned upside down, but most people come out of acute trauma, they're going to be okay. The folks who experience that acute trauma who do not recover are typically the ones in isolation who have had no one to talk with. Okay, so the next one is chronic trauma. And this is the tiger we talked about. Like, oh my God, every day the tiger was there. Chronic trauma. One day it was abuse. The next day it was hunger. The next day it was a natural disaster. The next day it was discrimination, and it's on and on. Chronic trauma includes ongoing abuse. It includes things like domestic violence and community violence. And the harm, which is that cortisol stays high, which means their whole system is going to be affected. I want to call out one more type of trauma, which is less well known and starting to be talked about much, much more in the foster care system for sure. Developmental trauma. Because our brains develop the fastest ever in utero. Next, ages 1 to 3. Next, ages 3 to 5. And right after that, adolescence. So if any of you have adolescents and you're like, I'm losing my mind, this kid has no idea what's going on, don't despair. They're in a wonderful time where their brains are restructuring. But those early years, let's talk quickly about those early years, including in utero. I adopted a child at 13 days. Today, he is 22. He's in his 5th year of college. I think he's going to graduate, and it has been like pushing a boulder the whole time. He came to me at 13 days, right? If trauma didn't happen in utero, there's no way to explain some of the struggles that he has. Those are struggles that came from his mom having chronic stress. When a woman is pregnant, she actually has some ability, the uterus has some ability, the placenta, to keep out foreign substances, including even some drugs, because it recognizes it as foreign. But cortisol is a natural chemical in the body, and cortisol crosses the placenta easily. which means that baby whose brain is developing at 1 billion neurological connections a day is having this toxic chemical wash over them while they're developing. And we see higher rates of emotional and behavioral problems just from kids who come from highly stressful and highly difficult pregnancies. And the bummer there is that can have nothing to do with the mom. She could be having an illness, someone died while she was pregnant. It doesn't mean she's a bad mom at all. It just means babies are really susceptible and little ones. So developmental trauma, that just means that cortisol that was washing, it was happening during a really critical time of brain development. Young children who have experienced that kind of developmental trauma are at huge risk for development of addictions. And I'm sure you know, adolescents or even older children who start using drugs and alcohol before age 18 are 90% more likely to develop an addiction. And that all has to do with the brain getting hijacked and not understanding what the real pleasure and reward system is, which makes early intervention so challenging. But again, the good news is God has created our brains to heal and grow at any age. At any age. It is never too late for our brains to heal and grow. And one of the awesome things, I was going to share this later, but I'm going to share now, is that our brains grow just by being in relationship. As Pastor John and I were even talking about this, I wish I would have written it down, but you probably remember that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection, I believe you said. Yeah, connection is so important. Our brains grow and heal in healthy relationship. If we all had little neurological suckies on our head right now and a monitor over here, while I'm sitting here like engaging with you in this cool conversation, it would show brain growth because we are interacting with each other. This is how the Lord made us, which is awesome, which makes your work so invaluable. If at the end of the day, you just show up, boom, that is like an A+, but we're going to keep moving on, but thank you for showing up. Okay, so developmental trauma. Developmental trauma, let me give you a quick example of a developmental trauma story because this is so common. And this story here it's the story of a boy named Johnny. It is not the story of my adopted children, but it almost could be. This is a pretty common story. So Johnny, this is a boy whose family we worked with. His mom had a very high stress pregnancy because she was involved it was domestic violence happening with her partner, the baby's dad. And he left her, he abandoned her. She felt like she couldn't cope. Johnny was just a couple months old. She relapsed. She had been clean for several years. She relapsed, started using substances. And we know that drug addicted mothers they're not very devoted. They're not able to be really devoted to their baby's care. She left 3-month-old Johnny with his grandma, who then had to leave him with his aunt, who then had to leave him with a cousin. And he just kind of passed around homes. In some of these homes, he experienced physical violence as well as neglect, but these were not these things that were done with a harmful intent. These were things that were done by exhausted caregivers who didn't really have capacity for a baby, and they were trying to help out, but he had to keep moving around because there was no home who could really take him in. When he was 2.5, Mom had found a new man and she was about to have another baby, and she came back and she wanted to be a family again. So they brought Johnny in, and when she had her baby, they were, going to be a family. But this baby's dad, who was living with them, put a sock in the baby's mouth to keep him from crying and suffocated him, and the baby died. And obviously, the man went to prison and Johnny was removed and he went into foster care and rights were permanently separated. All of this is by age 4. To see Johnny at age 5 getting ready to go into kindergarten, he was adorable. He was the cutest thing. He was even a bit charismatic. But how do you think his behavior was in kindergarten? It was disastrous. But nobody is going to see his timeline. Nobody's going to see inside of his brain, his dysregulation. Nobody is going to see the underlying fear. All they're going to see is behavior. And trauma-informed care is all about looking past behavior to see the story behind the behavior. We say sometimes that we want to see the struggle, honor the story, and support the healing. And in order to do that, we have to be the kind of people who are going to get curious instead of furious when behaviors arise. We've got to dig in. Changing behavior works for about a minute. Healing the meaning behind the behavior is what lasts for a lifetime, right? We are looking for long-term change, which means really like if you don't go to the root, you're very likely not going to see that. And if there's not connection involved, healing is limited. It is very, very hard to heal. God can do anything, but it's very, very hard to heal from past trauma without understanding people in your life. And interestingly, thank you for capturing these little quotes. It's so good. As I've worked with adolescents, I've worked with a lot of adolescents who live in out-of-home care. And as we've talked about their caregivers, I mean, without a doubt, the number one thing that they have loved about a caregiver is a caregiver who doesn't take their behavior personally, because it's like they understand that I was dysregulated, I was acting out, I was angry, but I don't really hate you. And I don't really want you to now punish me and not talk to me for 3 days, because what I need is you. What I need is relationship that doesn't give up on me because of my behavior. And the beautiful thing about that is, as we think about what Christ has done for us, when has he ever said, get your behavior right, and then you can be in relationship with me, right? He turns that on its head, right upside down on its head, and he says, no matter, nothing can separate me from your love. You can try your hardest, but I'm going after the one, I'm going after you. And for those who have struggled with difficult things, that is what I hope for us, that we can be the kind of people that say, I know you've got behavior. You might even be using words against me that are unkind. You know what? It's okay. I know your hurt is coming from somewhere, and I'm still here for you, right? I'm not going anywhere. Okay. All right, we're going to switch a little bit and talk about, let me pull up my little notes here. Let's talk more about the impact of trauma. I'm getting all excited. I'm going off script here a little bit. All right, let's talk about the impact of trauma. So I've mentioned a bit about the impact of trauma on the brain. We'll come back to that in a second. But the impact of trauma on the body, gosh, this is everywhere. Again, because cortisol is toxic, we often see adrenal fatigue, hormone imbalances, a weakened immune system. One of the things cortisol does is it literally attacks the body's immune system, which is why rates of autoimmune disease skyrocket for those who have chronic trauma. I mean, and it's why we get sick when we're stressed out. It tanks your immune system. Diabetes, cortisol attacks your insulin receptors. Heart problems, obesity, high blood pressure, all kinds of digestive disorders. And even I would just comment, like, think about heart problems. Why heart problems? Well, remember if you're living that life and that tiger is always outside the door and you are always in fight or flight mode, your heart is always beating like you're going to run. Your lungs are always pumping blood. And if you're shooting blood out to your muscles because you need to fight or flight, it has to come from somewhere. Well, the body is diverting blood away from your digestive system. It's diverting blood away from your reproductive system and shooting it out into your muscles to run. If that's been happening for months and months and months, no wonder heart disease and high blood pressure. Our heart's not meant to work like that, right? Digestive problems, our digestive and our reproductive systems, they haven't had the resources that they need. So we see that connection just skyrocket for folks. The impact of trauma on the brain. We've talked about this a bit, but I want to share two pieces. Here in the front of our brain is an area called the prefrontal cortex. If you've heard the phrase, like your brain's not developed until you're 25, they're talking about this part up here, right behind your brain, the prefrontal cortex. Part of the brain is extremely susceptible to trauma, really to anything. Trauma, substance use, it's very susceptible to neglect because it's highly specialized. So trauma impacts this area of the brain hugely. And that includes things like working memory. Working memory is my ability to remember something without writing it down and putting a sticky note right in front of me. Like, can I remember two or three things at a time to be successful in my job, to be successful in the grocery store, to be successful in my home? Working memory. Self-monitoring. Am I able to understand if the way I'm acting is appropriate socially? That's here. Planning and prioritizing, being able to initiate a task, organizing my environment and my thoughts. Impulse control is absolutely up here. My ability to control my impulses. Emotional control, flexible thinking, being able to think outside the box and try new things. All of that happens right here behind the brain, and trauma impacts all of that. It depresses all of those functions so that they don't work well. Again, the great thing about the way that the Lord has created us is that we have the opportunity to grow those and bring those back online with basically good relationships that help us feel safe and connected. I want to point out in this brain slide where you see red is blood flow. Blood flow is good. That means there's activity happening there. So we just talked about the prefrontal cortex. In the calm brain, the prefrontal cortex is here up top. We see lots of red, lots of blood flow. We know that that person right now has good impulse control, emotional control, organization, planning, and we see lots of good blood flow everywhere else. Let's look at the fear brain slide. And where do we see the majority of activity in that slide? It's on the bottom of the slide. The bottom of the slide represents an area called the amygdala. The amygdala is the fear center. And the fear center, when that is lit up, it's priority. Our bodies and our brains, priority is survival. So if we think we are in fear, our priority is everything has to focus on survival, which leaves almost nothing for all of those good prefrontal cortex things that were in the back. All right, I'm back to you. One thing that happens is that the brain, when the tiger's been there day after day, year after year, our brains, they change because they expect this to be our reality, and they change to look like that fear brain with that amygdala in the back lit up all the time. And those people live in what we call hypervigilance, always looking for a threat, really never able to just calm down. But the problem is with hypervigilance is that the amygdala becomes over-responsive. Now I'm seeing tigers everywhere. Tigers are everywhere, but under-selective. So the kitten walks in the room and my brain says, it's a tiger. So we have huge reactions when there is no threat and huge reactions when I see something benign and then I think it is a threat. Again, the great news about all of this is that we can reverse this. We can help that fear brain look like that calm brain with really some pretty easy interventions. And we're going to talk about some of those today, but we can help that brain. But one study I'll just share, because this is where I was. I was a foster parent actually I was a missionary in Mexico for many years. And one of the things I did is there were some boys who had grown up in an orphanage. And at age 15, Mexico has no more public free school. So that's junior high. If you want to go to high school, you're going to need to get enrolled and pay some tuition to get yourself into a high school. And the kids in the local orphanage, none of them were going to high school because nobody was able to get them in and support them and pay for it. So our ministry, we had some of those kids come and live with us. So I had some teenage boys live with me. I actually had 8 teenage boys live with me, and I had my 6 kids. So we had 16 people in our house, which is insane, and I don't really recommend it, but it was really fun while we were there because I'm a more the merrier type of person. But anyway, so we had these kids in the house, and I really thought I mean, some of the boys, I could tell they were in fear brain. They were suspicious. They were constantly stealing food from our pantry, even though I was like, hey, we got plenty of food for everybody. Like they were just operating in fear. A couple of them were just really rude to my little kids. And I was really thinking, like, gosh, I'm being as nice as I can. My husband and I are modeling good marriage and we're doing Bible study and we're taking them out for tacos. And like, I really thought I was giving holistic care. But let me share a study that was done out of Texas Christian University on children who were adopted from foreign orphanages and they were coming with super high cortisol levels. They had very poor care and they were adopted in like homes like your nice home, like nice people, good people. They measured their cortisol level and then followed them up with no particular training. There was just a control group. 3 years later, those children's cortisol levels had not gone down hardly at all. So we know that just being around nice people, it's actually not enough. It's not enough to help that stuck fear brain switch. We really need to be intentional about the things that we're doing. So we are going to talk about those. So that's the good news there. Okay, the next thing that trauma impacts that I want to share about is it impacts our belief system, right? The belief that I'm not safe, the belief that I'm not loved, the belief that I'm not valued directly impacts our emotions and our behaviors. Those things come from somewhere, right? And that's our belief system. If you've had a life of being talked down to and you've not been cared for, well, your belief system is likely going to be, I'm not loved, I'm not valued. The emotions that come out of that, depression, anger, maybe frustration, and the behaviors that come out of that, nothing good. We have the opportunity with every conversation. And we could sit here from now until 8:30 and talk about the scriptures that talk about the power of the tongue, the power of an encouraging word, the power of giving someone hope and joy. With one conversation, we can give someone the power of a new belief system. Many of you are involved in folks' lives for months, if not longer. The opportunity that we have to build a new belief system, even just by showing up. I come here every week, or I'm here every month, or I'm on every call because you matter. You know what? God loves you, and I'm here to show you that. Like, you're a cool person. I see so much potential in you. Like, I think it's really, I can't even believe how funny you are. Like, oh my gosh, you have such clever things to say. Whatever it is, we're building a belief system, and we are likely working with people who've not ever heard this kind of encouragement. Don't take for granted the power of a word, it's like a golden apple is what the scriptures tell us, a golden apple. It has the power of life. Many folks we work with, they've been living for perhaps their whole lives hearing only destructive words that have the power of death. And we're giving them the power of life. And that is key in helping to bring freedom, a new belief system, a new belief in being a child of God, in being someone that other people love and care for, and that I have a better future ahead of me. So trauma, it affects our belief system. We generally say, like, the belief system of abuse is I'm not loved, and the belief system of neglect is I don't even matter, right? I don't even exist, perhaps. We have the opportunity to change that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about recognizing trauma responses and triggers. Trauma responses and triggers are almost entirely connected to our regulation system. This is the next time, probably the last time, that I want to share my slides because I want to talk about our regulation system, what it is, and how we can work with it. So, and I'm kind of nerdy. I just kind of like science and things. So here we go. All right. Response. We're going to look at regulation. So let's talk about how regulation happens. And regulation is the ability to calm myself by myself, to feel okay, to be calm and content. That's regulated. Well, regulation, the ability to regulate, actually starts when we are born. Actually, it starts from the day we were born. We have a need, and when babies have a need, they cry, right? They've got nothing else. They can't text you or shout from their crib. They cry, they have a need. This is life or death. And their excitatory hormones kick in. It goes into what we call hyperarousal. They are dysregulated. The adult comes to help them out. Oof, okay, their body calms down, their brain relaxes, and they've returned to a state of regulation, right? Over here, the excitatory hormones. This is our sympathetic nervous system. It gets hyped up. This is where the cortisol happens. I have a need. Something is happening. I'm going into hyperarousal. Some response comes. That need is met. Safety is achieved, whatever it is. This inhibitory system, this parasympathetic nervous system comes, calms me down, and my brain relaxes. We learn this when we are little. When we are little, these systems are built, and these systems are kind of like muscles even. So let's take a look at how this can go awry. What if we have a need, and the need, you and I have needs every day. We can think of that as a stimulating event. We're tired, we're hungry, we're scared, we're anxious, we're angry, right? Those are just some emotional needs, but there's a stimulating event, and our brain is starting to go to that familiar fight, flight, or freeze place. And we need I have parental or caregiver, but a good friend from the Lord, your spouse, we need a response so that this inhibitory side comes and we calm down. We return to a state of regulation. If that response doesn't come, we stay stuck in that state of hyperarousal. That's how our brains stay stuck. Now, this slide here shows that external regulation, that's when you're a baby. What ability does a baby have to calm themselves down? None, right? I can't change my diaper. I can't get up and get myself a blanket. I can't get up and get myself a bottle. I can't get up and come hug you. Like, I am entirely dependent on you coming to calm me down. But when that is done well as a baby, then they start to learn, hey, we can do this together. I'm going to make a little noise to give you a verbal cue that I need something, right? The baby says like baba or something. And then you're like, okay, you come and you give me my bottle. And we're doing it together until this baby gets old enough. They're a toddler, they're walking around, getting into the fridge or getting into the diaper bag and getting out their juice box, and they're doing it themselves. We can only self-regulate well when we have had the kind of experiences that have taken us on this continuum, because these systems, again, they're like muscles, if you will. They need to both be developed. What we start to see happen in adolescence and older is when that external regulation hasn't been there for me, when I haven't known how to feel safe, I haven't known how to calm down, I haven't known who I can go to, I have no one to help. What can help me feel better? Well, maybe substances can. That's a quick fix and I can feel better. All right. It's my last time I'll pull out my slide. Thanks for letting me share those. Okay, so our systems, hyperarousal, something's going on. I'm stressed. I had a meeting today. I mean, and these don't have to be huge events. I had a meeting today with the director of a local children's hospital here. She's really cool and she's done a lot of research and she's really a bigwig. And I was actually nervous about my meeting. Like my stress response was kicking in. I realized I'm feeling nervous about my meeting. My stress response was kicking in. For me as an adult, right? For me as like a mature Christian, and I know about these things, I did some things to help stimulate this calm down system. I do some breathing. I do meditation. I pray. I get myself my world's hugest glass of water. I've been in places where I've gone out into the hallway before I was giving a talk and I've done push-ups. Like I do things to help regulate myself. But for many people, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to get out of that fear of whatever it is, that state of hyperarousal. You know, that meeting I had, if even that was a kitten, but for some reason my brain was like, tiger, tiger, this is a big deal. I think I was feeling like, oh, you're going to look dumb. You might not know what you're talking about. You're going to represent all of the things. You're going to represent your organization bad. And I was like, tiger. And I needed to regulate myself. For some folks, though, who this system has never been built up, it's like it loses its ability. We lose our ability to calm down unless we build it. And for many, the way to calm down has been something unhealthy. Something unhealthy, I need to feel better now. And our brain always prioritizes feeling better now. It's because our brain structure changes, right? Our brain structure changes with chronic trauma, with chronic stress, to I have to feel better now. I mean, on even a simpler level, this is why of the millions of times I've told myself I'm going to eat so healthy and I'm not going to have sugar and maybe I'm going to cut out carbs. And you have a totally stressful day and the first thing you do is you go to the grocery store and you buy sugar and carbs because you're like, I know I'm going to be mad tomorrow, but I'm going to feel better today. And that is how our brain structures to rewire. But for you and I, like we're like, we can laugh and we get it. But for some folks, it's actually much more serious and much more destructive for them. That's that we're looking for that freedom to be their very best potential, that freedom from the need for that and that ability to be, yeah, really to just be healthy and whole the way that they are. But so that's how regulation works. All right. And then, of course, trauma. You're reading my mail. Yes, I could go on and on. Never mind. I almost got distracted. Okay. Trauma affects our behavior, of course. But this is our understanding has to shift from judgment to compassion, right? These are responses that are based in survival and dysregulation. It shuts down our ability to really think. Like if you think back to our fear brain slide, if everything going on is down here, your behaviors are reactionary and they are self-centered. Okay, so trauma shuts down our behavior to think. Just save yourself the breath from ever saying, what were you thinking? Because they were not thinking, right? They weren't thinking, it just happened. But also the self-centered piece, our conscience, now this is beyond our spiritual conscience, right? Our conscience as a human being, it's here in our prefrontal cortex. The ability to put your needs above my needs happens here. And I can do that successfully when I feel safe. Now I feel like I can give. But if I'm in survival mode, my brain is actually forcing me to be self-centered, unless you're like an EMT or a firefighter and you're charging into, but you've trained for that stuff. The rest of us don't do that. The rest of us run because it is literally not a conscious thought. It is the reaction of trauma. Trauma alters our brain chemistry. One of the things that we can do to help heal, we were talking about those intentional strategies. You guys, this is not tough. One of the intentional things we can do is good nutrition and hydration, along with physical exercise. Now, I know when things are tough, it is hard for people to prioritize those things, but it is more important than we know. Our brain functions on water. Good nutrition speeds up our brain's healing process. And physical exercise, it is as much for our brain as it is for our body. By instituting good nutrition, hydration, and some exercise, we rapidly speed up the healing process. That is something we can do for ourselves and everyone that we work with. Dehydration fuels aggressive behavior. When our brains, they're floating around in our skull right now, whether we know it or not, right? They're floating around in there. And when we're dehydrated, the amount of water decreases and our brain actually kind of sits down on the bones of our skull, which is why we get headaches, and it irritates and it produces chemicals. It produces a chemical called glutamate that is responsible for aggressive behavior. There have been some interesting studies done in like kindergarten classrooms, rooms that have water and rooms that don't. So anyways, hydration, nutrition, physical exercise, we can all do this. We can help this. Fear suppresses the voice. It makes it hard, even as you're available and wanting to have productive conversations. That kind of top trauma fear brain, it makes it hard for us to find the right words. and to express ourselves. So we need to be patient. With kids, we pull out a feelings chart. I don't know if that's appropriate with an adult or not, but maybe, why not? There's probably a cool looking feelings chart. Sometimes when we haven't lived the kind of life where we were regularly assessing how we feel and it's survival all the time, and we didn't grow up maybe in a home where people were talking about feelings, it makes it very hard to express yourself. Fear causes us to set up protective strategies. Now, these are behaviors that they look and sound like bad behaviors, but they're rooted in traumatic stress. These protective strategies fall into two categories. Some of them are acting out, and some of them are acting in. Acting out strategies get all the attention because those are the obvious ones. Acting out strategies happen when I have not lived the kind of life where I believe I can count on other people to help me, to meet my needs. The world isn't a safe and trusting place. I can only count on one person, and that's myself. These strategies include manipulation, lying, stealing, verbal aggression, physical violence, and control. These are ways I've had the opportunity to train in lots of places and in lots of countries, and we see these everywhere. And nobody went to a whiteboard and like sketched out their plan. They are ways that we learn to try to get our needs met. They look like bad behavior, but they're rooted in traumatic stress. They're rooted in fear. Now, there's also acting in strategies, and these are a big deal. There are folks who are at risk for self-harm. They're at risk for taking their own lives. They're at risk for not getting the services they need because they are not the squeaky wheel. The acting in strategies include perfectionism, extreme people-pleasing, extreme fear of conflict, serving, performance-based activity, and hiding. And I always say, well, I mean, perfectionism doesn't sound that bad. Like, I'm kind of a perfectionist. How do I know if it's trauma-based or not? And I always just say, look at the emotions attached to it. If this is a person who is performing these things and you see the emotions of fear and anxiety attached to it, this is rooted in fear, in an unhealthy place. If you see things like hope and even joy and some humor attached to it, it's probably this person and they're dealing with some things that are their own, right? Like, we would never say it's bad to serve. But if I have to serve other people so that I can feel like that is how I will be safe, that's where we know that it's a problem. Acting in. These behaviors, we see them often, and the root, again, is not to get furious, and it's not even to call out a bad behavior until you've given them something to replace that behavior with. And that is that we want to give people their voice back. In order for folks to have their voice back, they have to know that we are wanting to connect with them and that we're trustworthy. So this is the next one that we're going to talk about. Well, how can we focus on trust, building trust and connection? Again, I know you do this, and I know you do a lot of this, but relationship is key. We're created to be in relationship, right? Genesis tells us our relational unity, it draws others to Christ. We see this in John 13. Fullness is expressed in relationship. We even think of man and woman in the body of Christ and the Trinity itself. Relationship is key. Connection is key. However, we know that for many folks who've come from difficult places, relationships can be hard. Trust can be hard, and it needs to be earned. We start with safety. Safety is not just physical safety, but physical safety is absolutely important. Safety also needs to be felt. It needs to be felt in the body, because if we don't feel it in our body and brain, even though we are physically safe, our brain still looks like that fear brain. We're still living like the tiger is there, even when the tiger is not there. An author and a physician that I love, and I love his work, his name is Bessel van der Kolk. And he says that more than anything else, being able to feel safe with other people defines mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. So I just have a couple quick things about being safe and connecting. And these do not sound like rocket science, but along with supporting healthy brain chemistry, that was our hydration, nutrition, and repetitive exercise. These two things have been shown to be part of the keys that helps people move from fear brain to safe brain. And the first one is it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And I know that we all know this, but nonverbals are super important when we are working with folks who have experienced traumatic stress, because their hyper-vigilant brains are far beyond listening to words. Because they are constantly scanning for threat and scanning for clues, they are extremely fast to pick up on tone of voice, body language, facial expressions, right? All of those things, they see it. So we need to be aware of. I've heard people say, stand in front of a mirror, ask your kids, which no, I'm not going to ask my kids what my face looks like. I already know what they're going to say. But our nonverbals, to the point of you might even need to overemphasize it just to make sure you're not neutral, because with trauma survivors, neutral can register as bad. So we need to be not just neutral. We need to be, my friend calls it the Disney princess. We need to be safe, the way we would be with a small child. We need to watch our tone of voice. We need to think about what our eyes are saying. We need to think about if they're sitting, we're going to sit. We don't want to stand over people. Be really aware of our nonverbal cues. And then the next one, be predictable and be consistent. It's been said that at the root of toxic stress is unpredictability. You never know what's going to come. You never know when you're going to be safe. You never know when the next abuse, attack, you never know when it's going to come. And so you are always on alert. The more predictable we can be, the more safe people will feel with us. So predictable for us, it even means that you know how you're going to respond when something difficult comes up, right? We're supporters. We're not the saviors. It's not our place to judge. It's not our place to show frustration. It's our place to stay regulated and stay calm and be supportive. And then, of course, consistency. Consistency is huge because, again, you are changing someone's belief system by just being involved in their life week after week, day after day, whatever it is. Consistency over time equals trust. That's really what it comes down to. It's not going to be one interaction. Your one interaction with someone is not going to change 20 years of previous belief that the world is not safe and that people are not helpful, right? Your one interaction isn't going to change that. It's going to take consistency. It's going to take you still showing up even when their behaviors tried to push you away. Okay, so I want to talk about 3 responses that we see that are responses to the fear of relationship. Okay, so the fear of relationship. The first one we see is called defensive dominance. Defensive dominance means I can be in a relationship if I am in control. Whether that's a friendship, whether it's my child, whether it's a romantic relationship, as long as I am in control, I control everything that happens, I control you, then I can be in this relationship. It's defensive dominance. The next one is called defensive detachment. These are the people that will not even take a chance. They're going to push you away before you have a chance to leave them. It's really what the root of it is. You're probably going to leave me. You're going to find out something about me. I'm going to ruin this anyways. Why even bother? They will push you away before you even have a chance. And these are the people that insult you. These are the people that you constantly set up an appointment with and they never show up, right? They are purposely trying to sabotage your relationship because they already believe it's not going to work out and it would be easier to just get it over with. Okay, defensive detachment. And the next one is called defensive reattachment. And this is people who are able to attach, but only to things that they feel are not threatening. and not threatening. I'll share one example of this. That's more from my world with teenagers, and then an example for adults. But I was doing some consulting with a children's home in Africa, and the aunties there, that's what they call their caregivers, were frustrated because they worked with these teenage girls. Teenage girls lived there. They were working with them, investing time, like really trying to help them grow and heal, and they just could not get these girls to open up, and they were feeling frustrated because some volunteers had come, and they saw a girl out on the front porch, like in a chair, pouring her heart out to a volunteer, whereas the aunties that had been there with them for months and months and months, and they would never share anything with them, and they were feeling like so angry and so mad at the volunteer. And I told her, I said, do you know what that is? That is actually called defensive reattachment. If that girl shares her heart with you and you leave, that is going to rip out a part of her. You're a part of her life now. But she knows the volunteer is going to leave. This is a mission guest who like came to Africa, and she's leaving next week. Like, she already knows that this mission guest is going to leave. And if she leaves, I don't mean volunteers like you guys. I mean like she was a mission guest. If she leaves, no big deal. I already knew she was going to leave. So it doesn't cost me anything to tell her my story. For some folks, that is online relationships. That is all things in the virtual world. And sometimes it's forming relationships with other people who I deem to be worse off than I am. I set my bar low because that feels less threatening. And that's the kind of relationship I feel like I could be in. That's called defensive reattachment. Those are all fear-based, of course, and they all have the same interventions: consistency over time, right? I don't see you as a problem. Like, I see you as an awesome creation of God. You're an opportunity. That's consistency over time is the only way to get past it. There's no shortcut, but it's consistency while being safe. It's consistency while supporting healing, and it's consistency while being curious and not judgmental. All right. We are going to have time for our self-care a little bit here at the end, but I wanted to talk just briefly about the concept of support versus enable, helping versus enable. When am I helping more than the person wants to be helped? And just some strategies around that. So, of course, helping involves providing support and encouraging growth and independence. And if enabling is more about removing consequences for harmful behavior. So showing up and being available is 100% support, right? And enabling would be removing consequences for harmful behavior, which of course can reinforce just negative behaviors. Signs of enabling include things like making excuses for behavior. Signs of support is helping someone get to the bottom of their behavior. Obviously, there's a little bit of a difference there. I want to share one tool this is a lot of words, so I hope if this is interesting to you, you'll have to download the handouts. Some of my doctoral work was involved using something called motivational interviewing. I wish it wasn't called that because I feel like that's a strange word. There's no interviewing about it for me. It's a way to help positively motivate people. I use it with my teenagers all the time, actually. I actually use this with my oldest daughter, who sometimes her and I like kind of butt heads. And if I tell her anything I think is a good idea, she'll immediately do the other thing. So I've got to like out psychologically maneuver her. But this is just a way to help motivate folks that puts the ball in their corner, but keeps us in a supportive position. So there's 4 keys to this. And the first one is to express empathy. And we know some of those tools, right? Active listening, validation, right? That sounds hard. Like, I can see that this is really hard for you. A tool called developing discrepancy. And this is when we help them see that there's a gap between your goals and your behaviors, right? Like, there's a gap here, and I'm going to help you see it. The next one is called rolling with resistance. So this is like avoid arguing. You let people explore their own motivation. One of the things that I learned about this style is that when somebody is really having trouble making a choice, say like, I don't know, where should I go on the way home tonight? Should I go to Taco Bell or should I go to McDonald's? The very fact that one of you might be, oh, you should go to McDonald's for sure. You should definitely go to McDonald's. If you say that to me, my brain automatically reinforces the other choice and makes the other choice look more attractive because the other choice is going to sound like my choice. So that's kind of the basis here of rolling with resistance, right? It is absolutely your choice, and I don't have to validate either choice. I just want to point out what your goals are and help you see if your behaviors are getting to your goals. And then self-efficacy, which is helping them believe that change is possible. So I just have an example conversation of this, and forgive me if this is too long to listen to me read this, but I don't know, sometimes I think it's practical to hear somebody kind of play something out. So here's our scenario. And I used this scenario has to do with somebody who is struggling with substance use. So the scenario, it's right, there's somebody, they're supporting an individual, they want to keep using, but they keep relapsing. So I would say they're sharing that, and I say, I appreciate you sharing that. It sounds like part of you really wants to stop, but another part of you is struggling. Tell me more about that. That's expressing empathy. That's a great way to have an open-ended question, no matter who you're talking with, really. Again, I use this with my young adult kids all the time. All right, the individual. Yeah, I hate what this is doing to me, but I just don't think I can quit. Every time I try, I fail. My response, right? I'm active listening, I'm validating. It's really frustrating to feel stuck in this cycle, but you've made attempts before, which shows you care about making a change. What's worked for you in the past? Okay, so I'm going to support their self-efficacy, have them start thinking. Individual, well, I did okay when I had a job and a routine, but I lost my job and everything fell apart. My response, okay, that makes a lot of sense. When you had structure, it helped you stay focused. If you were to find that structure again, how do you think it would affect your recovery? This is the developed discrepancy. Try to see your goals and try to see what is it you can do to make it to your goals, okay? The individual, I guess it would help. I don't know where to start. Me, that's completely understandable. What's one small step you could take this week that might help you feel more stable? Right? I'm going to encourage micro goals, small steps. Maybe I could start looking for jobs again. That's a great step. I believe in you, and I am here to support you however I can. Right? There's something practical we can do. I can help. This person has stated their goal. They've stated what's worked for them in the past. I'm not over-identifying with their feelings. I'm not removing any of their consequences. I'm helping them get to a place where I can help them make a goal. So anyways, I hope you find that kind of idea helpful. Again, I use it all the time, even with my kids, but it's really helpful in the world of addictions, frankly. And I think it's primarily used in the world of addictions because we want to help folks feel like they have some power to elicit some change. And of course, we believe that God is really the source of all of that power. But as we bring in the fact that like you have like the Holy Spirit is within you, God is within you, and he's going to help you. And I'm here as his hands and feet on this earth to help make it happen. Yeah, you guys, we can make a big difference in people's lives. This is important work. And because it is important work, I'm going to finish our last few minutes here and talk a little bit about self-care, and then we'll do some question and answer. Remember, with the right perspective in self-care and caring for us, we are supporters, we're not the savior. We have to be able to distance ourselves a little bit from outcomes. For myself, I mean, I'm a missionary. I've been in full-time ministry for 22 years. Not all of my 6 kids are really walking with the Lord right now. They're in different places. They're on their own journeys. What the Bible says, you raise a child up in the way they should go and they won't depart from it when they're older. Well, that means I must have not raised my child up in the way they should go. And now I feel bad. You get where I'm going with this, right? Like, we're not the savior, and we have to have a little bit of distance between outcomes, right? We're faithful. We show up. We represent Christ the best we can, but God did not create people to be robots, and we don't control them. So we have to have some distance there. Self-care is not a selfish act. It's really stewardship of your life. Remember, we're not trying to burn out. We're not trying to burn out. We want to stay. We want to be hands and feet. We want to be bringing the kingdom of heaven on earth for years to come. Self-care is stewardship. Oh, I want to share a word on secondary trauma. When we are naturally empathetic people, which most of us are who do this kind of work, we're actually more susceptible to experiencing secondary trauma because we feel people's feelings. One thing that I have to be careful of myself is that if I'm not careful, I start to visualize other people's trauma when they share it with me. So I have a whole like cleansing kind of thing that I do to make sure I'm constantly giving that back to the Lord, because otherwise I've taken on someone else's trauma and now I have trauma. That's what secondary trauma is. We want to have some good kind of guardrails in place to help us be able to deal with the difficult stories that we hear, the difficult things we see as we're walking alongside of people. Number one, of course, is always prayer, right? We're always giving those things to the prayer, even if you have to sit and open your hands upside down and release people. Sometimes I'm literally doing the act of like, oh, I want to hold them, but I'm actually releasing them to you, Lord. Journaling. But I also encourage you to know who is your go-to person if you need to process something. Debriefing is a vital tool for those of us who work with other people who are sharing. We have to be able to process emotional weight of this work in safe spaces. So we should know who is our crisis debriefer. I hear a story. For me, I have a hard time with sexual abuse stories. When people share sexual abuse stories with me, I almost always need to go to my safe person and debrief it and pray, because those are hard for me, right? So we need to know who are we going to go to? It's another volunteer, maybe it's Pastor John, maybe it's your spouse, right? Someone that'll keep confidence, but someone that'll help you just kind of give that to the Lord so that we're not taking it. We definitely don't want to take it home to our families. We don't want to take it into our sleep. Having nightmares it's a sign that we're approaching things like secondary trauma. We've taken the weight of our work on ourselves. So crisis debriefing, it should be within 24 hours, but 48 hours for sure. Try to do a crisis debrief as fast as possible, and that's just share what happened and pray through it. It's a good idea to do a weekly debrief, right? Make sure you're not carrying something into your weekend. Just reflect back. Make sure you're feeling like your space as well. That takes some self-awareness, and reflect back over the practices through your prayer practice, over your contemplative practice, over your worship practice, and make sure you're feeling like all of those things, you've released those to the Lord. Now, burnout is a little different than secondary trauma. Burnout is when we're starting to lose hope, we're starting to lose joy, we're starting to disengage, we're starting to feel like we're not making a difference. Burnout is more characterized by a little bit of anger and frustration. And typically when we have staff here, or we have folks who are starting to enter a stage of burnout, I recommend a little bit of a sabbatical. Take a step back. Maybe it's time to take a break from your work. Check it back in with the Lord. Make sure this is the place to be, because we often see two things happen with burnout. We see folks just leave, right? So they quit, they leave, they walk away kind of angry, or they stay and now they've become the mayor of Toxicville, and they're spewing their bad energy to everybody else, and they're trying to get everybody to come move into Toxicville with them. And then that is also a problem we don't want. A break is a good idea, to just help keep ourselves fresh and help to keep ourselves compassionate. So burnout, yeah, and secondary trauma, huge risks when we're in this work, but they're risks that are worth it. And if we're intentional, we can help keep ourselves guarded from those things. Along with debriefing, the last thing I want to share, and you have a handout at the back of your handouts. You have a handout that's really for you. It's a worksheet called Rest and the Gift of Boundaries. Something very actually life-changing for me that I learned that doesn't feel like so crazy, but is that there are many kinds of rest. This totally makes sense, but I didn't really get it. I thought rest, sleep, take a nap. There's different kinds of rest. There is physical rest, of course, but there's mental rest. If you wake up in the nighttime and your brain starts chattering and you can't get back to sleep, you actually don't need more sleep. You need mental rest. Mental rest is giving your mind a break from the stressful work. It's a puzzle, it's art, it's mental rest. Your brain needs to calm down. There's emotional rest. That's getting in touch with how you feel. Spiritual rest, of course, retreats and soul care days. There's social rest. That's not taking a break from people. Sorry, introverts. Social rest is making sure you're spending time with the people who fill you up. Sometimes working with folks who are going through hard things can be depleting. Sometimes the folks we're working with, they're like sandpaper and we're compassionate, but they are scratching up against us a lot. And we need some social rest. We need to be around people who fill us up. Sensory rest, right? Away from our screens and our lights, and then creative rest. You need the kind of rest that matches the kind of tired you are, right? We are different kinds of tired, and something like a soul care day and a journal can help us identify like, I think I kind of know what kind of tired I might be. The author of this book, maybe somebody can put it in the chat for me. The author of this book, if you go to her website, she has a little rest quiz you can take. Her name is Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, and it's restquiz.com. Real is her website for her book. And you can take a little quiz if you like those little quizzes where you check boxes, and then it'll tell you what kind of tired you are. I always think those little quizzes are fun. And then spend some time when you get a chance with that little worksheet at the end and think about how you're going to fill your buckets, fill your rest buckets so that you can stay healthy and that you can stay involved in the work. All right, guys, 5 minutes for Q&A.
I would like to say thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is so needed because while I was working early this morning, I do work for the federal government, y'all.
Okay.
And I put in a leave for tomorrow, but this training, I needed to hear this. And tomorrow I plan to walk in the morning. I plan to, do some self-care for me because it's like, oh my God, trying to work through all of the stuff and helping people. I'm like, I need time away. So
That's
thank you so much. This is so on time. I thought I was going to meet with another meeting with my Freedom Ministry team. So everybody said, no, we're going to come over to this meeting. So yay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good.
And Stephanie Clark has her hand up.
Hi,
So
Stephanie.
awesome, Dr. Julie. Thank you so much, first of all.
You're
My
welcome.
question is, in a situation of trauma, let's say, and you identify that that's the case with the person, and you're already at the level where you understand boundaries and distance, is there, I guess my question would be, at what point, and is there such a thing as having to, cut off permanently because it's just constant toxicity?
Yeah,
And you like you said, we're not the savior.
that's
So
right.
we've done all that we can. Amicably speaking, of course, we're going to love, we're going to have compassion, but knowing that we've identified that this is going to be habitual. And I think in some cases, when a healing process, let's say, is still taking place, sometimes people still know how to manipulate or, and sometimes people will try to attach because they want that attention.
I was just going to say, that's right. I think that's smart of you. Yes, you're exactly right. Like sometimes that attachment piece we talked about, if we find people trying to attach to us in a way that is not our role, it is smart to step back. And we are not always the one for the person in front of us. Sometimes it's someone else. And actually there's a lot of wisdom there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Right.
Shirley Kelly posted a question in the comment in the chat. When you relive the stressful event, does it affect the brain as the event did when you first experienced it?
Yes, actually it does. It's crazy how our memory and our sensory system works, but our body, which is the devastating thing with like PTSD, you're reliving it over and over, and you need to break that cycle. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, gosh, so many great nuggets, far too many to even list. This was really, really powerful stuff, Dr. Julie. So thank you. My question, you talked about cortisol, right? And it's and the way it passed through, even through the mother to the baby. Does that apply to other hormones like dopamine, the pleasure hormone, and the same? Like, does the same rule apply, and does it sort of create the same type of traumatic experience for the babies that translate later in life as well?
So hormones like dopamine, oxytocin aren't shown to have, since they affect kind of a different part of the brain. More it's adrenaline and cortisol that we see kind of disrupt development. Any hormone in excess can, but we really don't see the negative consequences for those the way that we do with cortisol.
Something that was very interesting to me is the ability of the brain to create new cells and get rid of the toxic ones. And this kind of relates to what Shane was saying a few moments ago. So if those brain cells really healed and new ones were generated and the negative ones are like gone or going, so how does that new trauma still affect that person in such a negative way? That's one question. And then I have another one. So much information that you're giving now helps me understand. My daughter has been doing foster care for 20 years, and so has my sister. And my sister is so frustrated, but a lot of what you're talking about, I see this in their behavior. But a really sad thing is happening, Dr. Julie. The CPS system medicate the children so much, and they are assigned psychologists and psychiatrists. Yet medication is so much the solve all. And I don't understand that. To me, it's just very, very sad. So I don't know if you have anything that you can say or add about that.
Really, yeah. The interesting thing about hypervigilance is it looks very much like ADD. So I think we end up medicating kids who are hypervigilant because they're the kids they're not paying attention because they're constantly distracted by their environment. The environment is what is going to keep them safe or not. And they're not paying attention to other things going on. And it looks like ADD and it gets misdiagnosed because it's faster. It's faster, frankly, to put a child on a medication than it is to help rebuild their prefrontal cortex. So
Right.
we see it all the time, actually. And it's just a matter of, are the providers trauma informed? Do they understand alternative ways that they can help that child heal? And are people willing to put in the time to do it?
That's a big one right there. We're out of time, but Ava, since you had your hand up, we'll let you have the last question.
I hope you can hear me because I'm
Yeah, we
using
can hear
my
you.
cell phone. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jolie. This is such a good wisdoms and everything that you have to share, and it could not come at a better time. I work with people on a daily basis that have disabilities, especially those that are deaf and hard of hearing. But I recently went through a training for people with IDD, intellectual disabilities, on helping them relationship coach, whether or not they get frustrated or how to acclimate into society. But I've heard with certain frustrations when the trainer was speaking about, and I wanted to know that we have the ability in our brains within 90 or 60 seconds to get rid of a negative or traumatic experience or to try to forget about it. But it's sometimes us that keeps replaying it over and over again. I'm not sure what you can say about that. And thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, a negative experience, I would say that is true. A traumatic experience, I don't think that is true. But a negative experience, I've heard the same, that if you just give it 90 seconds, if you're really sad or you're really if you just allow it to go for 90 seconds, it will pass. But the thing about a traumatic experience is it hijacks the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the emotional center, which is why we have that emotional shock. Emotional center of the brain goes haywire, and the left side, the logical, linear side, is offline. So with a trauma, the replaying, it's not a conscious decision. We actually can't help it until somebody helps integrate that, calm down our brain and integrate the story so that we can begin to understand what happened. When we're stuck in that initial relational piece, the right side of the brain does it, and it's actually not a conscious decision. So I would say a negative event and correct. And maybe I choose to harp on it, could be correct. But for a trauma, I would say it's a little bit different. It's not really a choice. It's just the way that the brain was hijacked.
Let's give it up for Dr. Julie. Thank you so much. This was so powerful. And we needed this. We needed this.
Thank you. You're an
awesome training.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
All
Good
right.
night.
Bye.